I'd like to dedicate this video to Pik-sen Lim, the narrator of Dark Souls, who passed away as I was finishing the script for this video. Thank you for bringing to life this world that myself and so many that I know have come to care about so much. The Dark Souls trilogy is one of the most talked about pieces of video game media released in the last couple of decades, and the original Dark Souls is known as many things, most iconically for being the Dark Souls of Dark Souls. And to synthesize the game into a couple of strong points, you know, when someone says it has amazing world building or the designs are so inspired, I feel that those simple acknowledgements are missing something. When the game's quality is brought up in passing as some of its attributes in isolation to one another, it can make it easy to forget some of the many nuanced and intricate reasons that the game earned itself a legendary reputation. And not just the reputation of being difficult for the time, as its sequels would quickly overtake it there. So I want to explore that with some granularity as we look through some of the secondary and tertiary effects that some of my favorite design choices have on the way that the game is played, replayed, and what that does to the scope of the game. And what better place to start than with one of the most celebrated features of the original Dark Souls, the map. My party trick is knowing the URL to this bad boy here. This is a model of Lordran, it's a 3D model, and just look at this thing. The first time you set foot in it, this world, which is really just one massive level composed of many, many levels, demands a whole different kind of attention from the player, and it rewards you for getting to know it well. Future Souls games, and especially their early levels, have a much different game design philosophy behind the way that the areas in the world connect to one another. The simplest way I can think to describe it is that they signal to the player that the way of progressing is just walk forward and everything else kind of figures itself out if you're good enough to kill the enemies. I'm especially looking at you, Dark Souls 3. Subsequent games might have more polished looks, but this world has so much soul. Lordran has a way of indifferently welcoming you and acknowledging your presence while making no effort to be hospitable towards you. You are in this quiet and serene landscape, and it couldn't care less that you're there. It's in this way that the beginning of Dark Souls 1 is tonally distinct from 2 and 3. The second and third game really hype you up as being that guy as you march through cutscenes and dialogue that welcome you back to a somewhat familiar setting with that "oh shit, here we go again" attitude as they hoist you into more linearly sequenced levels that have more of a familiarly video gamey feel to them. Let's contrast the tutorials of Dark Souls 1 and 2 as a microcosm of this. Dark Souls 2 plops you into the things betwixt where you are greeted by the cackling hags that know who you're supposed to be without knowing who you are. As you progress past them, the level flows from left to right to left as it runs you through tutorials and tries to ensure you kind of know what you're doing. Dark Souls 1, however, gives you some messages in a hallway, a few meat puppets to beat up, and then a skill check, knowledge check boss fight that you have to 5-shot before it lets you run free in the world. The opening of Dark Souls 1 is unmistakably more subtle, and most of us will remember what these first moments of the game felt like. Some might point to the subtlety of the tutorial's presentation as a fault. I would make the case that Dark Souls 1's tutorial is tastefully minimalistic, and while plenty of people would disagree, maybe, contending that a tutorial really ought to hold your hand if the game isn't going to, what stands out to me is that it feels like a deliberate choice of tone, not just corner cutting. As if you, just by circumstance, ended up here instead of some other hero. The world could not care less. And once the asylum has set the stage for the level design to come, complete with extra unlocky doors, loopy staircases, keys that you don't have yet, and the world trying to kill you, you step out to a vista of sorts, but you aren't given time to relish in the beauty as Velka allegedly kidnaps you, yaps your ear off a little bit more, and drops you right here in Firelink Shrine. So let's go back to that thing I mentioned earlier about Dark Souls 1's world requiring attention from the player. Or perhaps intention is the correct word. You see, Dark Souls 3's tutorial ends with you teleporting to the High Wall of Lothric from Firelink Shrine, which took me an embarrassingly long time to figure out back in 2016. You'll remember that after the forward march of the High Wall of Lothric, it is pretty much a straight shot to the Undead Settlement, then the Crossroads, Swamp, Catacombs, and so on, with only the occasional detour. The player is railroaded most of the way throughout the base game, not being able to choose which Lord of Cinder you fight first or last. And then just like that, the game is mostly over. You might have noticed that I didn't mention the ability to kill the Dancer as a first real boss, unlocking some of the castle and the Consumed King's Gardens. This is actually one of my favorite sequence-breaking choices in Dark Souls 3, so much so that my most played character, the one that I finished 100%ing the game on, is the one where I took about 6 hours in the beginning of the game to kill the dancer first. But this level of choice is an outlier in Dark Souls 3's otherwise linearly constructed boss and area sequence. Now contrast that to a story that is as old as Now contrast that to an area Now contrast that to a story that is as old as the Age of Ancients itself. The crow drops you into Firelink Shrine, and you curiously meander into a graveyard. You get ravaged by skeletons, and you die. If you're one of the lucky ones to turn around rather than to commit yourself to starting with the catacombs on your first playthrough, you might head back and go the way you came, maybe down an unsuspecting staircase, past a voiceless NPC, down a long, long elevator. And the enemies down here don't even attack you, so this must be the real start. And it's so dark, that's why it must be called Dark Souls. Wait, why can't I hit the go? Okay, the staircase. Compared to those other areas, a new player will find some relative peace coming up here. Hey, and by the way, if you think more people should see this passion project of mine, go ahead and hit like for me if you like it. If you dislike it, that's fine, dislike it. But don't subscribe is stupid. Anyway, back to the video. Ascending into the Undead Burg, you'll work your way through an amazing first level until you come to a curiously quiet rampart. For first-timers, this is an incredibly rewarding fight. Once you piece the puzzle together, taking out the archers first and jump attacking the Taurus demon, victory is yours. You've learned that a boss arena can be more than just a room to fight an enemy in. It can be a tool. Something you might have noticed is that these early bosses will more often be built around the arena that they're found in. And as a whole, this is something that the boss design in Dark Souls 1 wins points for over, let's say, Elden Ring. The fights in that game are very intricate, but most of the notable fights take place in large, pretty, open, and often rectangular rooms. So where bosses in Elden Ring might serve as just an epic test and a checkpoint, this game's bosses in rooms feel like a living part of the world. We just bested a demon who was hiding on a bridge, pouncing on unsuspecting passerbys. He escaped from hell to get here, and you just sent him back, so good job. From here, the game opens up to you with a few real options for your next boss. You can go make your way past the church and Andre, down to the garden, to the Moonlight Butterfly, or if you stumble across this key, you can use it to take on the Capra demon right now, under the Taurus demon. The game's seemingly intended path, however, is coming up to the church, working your way through this level, and fighting the gargoyles. They're required for getting into Sen's Fortress unless you would like to parry in front of this here pillar. But we're not doing a glitch speedrun, so right before we head up to the next required boss is the fabled elevator. This is where the map clicks for most players, and as you descend and Firelink Shrine reveals itself to you, you're left reflecting on the journey up here so far. It makes so much sense when you take a step back to look at it. They didn't really need to do this for the game to be good so far, but this is definitely a top 10 Watch Mojo gaming moment. Now that we're done marveling, we'll come back up here, kill the chickens, ring the thing, and if it's your first time, you might fuck around, get lost, not know what to do, and look it up, or quit the game. But we're not in this hypothetical, so let's go pick up the basement key and walk towards the depths. The way down is very obscure. I do find it funny that the game expects you to remember that one locked door right after Bridge Boy here, but in all fairness, and to the credit of Miyazaki's game design philosophy as a whole, you could probably figure it out if you checked item descriptions. That said, let's Snake Eater, Staircase, and Peak. They do it again. The level design in this game is no joke. With this being the second time this happens within a few gameplay hours of each other, Dark Souls really starts to instill in the player that you are in this world, and you are in the driver's seat to make the big choices while traversing it. The layout of the world creates a skill curve of sorts with getting from point A to point B. I went back and forth on whether or not this was the right time to wax poetic about the beauty of this, and honestly I didn't trust myself to get the point across as well as if I just said, oh my god, this is so fucking cool. There is a reason that this funny website does not exist for any other Souls game. And this is a good time to hit this Burg bonfire, head back down the stairs, or if you're a real gamer, do this. Now, on the way down, let me actually talk about that bonfire really quick. This used to be a big point of conversation way back in the day when Dark Souls 2 came out. I haven't heard as many people talk about it recently, and that is mostly because of how From Software seems to have shifted their checkpoint design strategy with each game that they released after this. This part is fully conjecture and comparative, but I like this checkpoint system substantially more than the ones found in 2 or 3. There's something to be said overall about game size and content, but just take a second to look at the compared number of bonfires between Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3. Each bonfire in Dark Souls 1 takes itself so seriously, and the other FromSoft games that actually does this the best is Bloodborne. These levels and worlds as a whole are designed with so many different factors in mind, but what I would like to highlight here is the care put into the checkpoints. You find yourself reusing the same bonfire for multiple different purposes. The level design enables yet another layer of conscious choice in the way that you leverage your resources such as Estus and humanity, along with the layout of the world to better interact with the challenges that it poses to the player. By the way, before I move on from Bloodborne for now, for those who are interested, Dude, I'm having a stroke. I linked a Reddit thread in the description where a user dumped Bloodborne's map file and loaded it into a 3D model viewer so that you too can marvel in the excellence of From Software's map design. And it's kind of like the website, and I said the Dark Souls 1 was the only one with this kind of website, and it's still technically kind of true, unless you can prove me wrong. I really looked, I couldn't find anything. If you guys find some, just put it in the comments. Anyway, back to the game. This kind of bonfire placement can be found all over, and a consequence of this type of checkpoint system is runbacks. Elden Ring mostly did a fantastic job at killing them, almost entirely with the Stake of Marika, but if you're cultured, you know what the runback of Reindeer Fuckland was like in Dark Souls 2. That is all to say. I don't actually mind a runback all too much. I learned the game through them, and it's funny because when this game came out, and really the only thing you had to compare it to was the far less played predecessor Demon Souls and Dark Souls 2 soon after, back when runbacks were a widely accepted part of the game, they actually made Dark Souls 1's map design and bonfire placement stand out even more for the ability of one bonfire to be a rest point coming from one direction, a mid-level checkpoint for another, and a boss runback all at the same time. And this is one of those points of appreciation for the game that I think was lost to time, as the meaning of bonfires and the function of bonfires, graces, and stakes would all evolve alongside how the maps were made to match. On the whole, I like the Stake of Marika system, but while I mentioned Elden Ring alleviating the player of runbacks in that sense, I think the game still handled the other checkpoints a little less gracefully on the whole. I can articulate this point best by coming back to the map. Really take a look at the Undead Parish and Undead Burg. Outside of being fantastically laid out levels that play smoothly, their impeccable design serves as not just a vehicle for gameplay, but also as a mode of traversal. Let's look at what I understand to be the most highly regarded legacy dungeon in Elden Ring, being Leyndell and the Sewers. They are laid out well and they play fantastically, but in isolation, that is really all they do because of the choice for Elden Ring to be an open world game. Each of these larger, intricate areas serve as an homage to the game's roots and as a way to set up for their often important area boss. Once the levels are beaten, the player is often meant to continue forward through a singular open world area. Imagine if Leyndell's capital was not only the crescendo of Elden Ring's mid-game, but if they were able to work in connections to various other points of importance on the plateau. But I think at this point, more comparisons on this would be outside of the scope of the video. I already had to cut like 15 minutes of me talking about Elden Ring's map choices. So, that's gonna be for another time. And of course, that isn't to imply that the difference in layout and interconnectedness is an indication that Elden Ring's areas lack quality. However, it is the isolation of this high-quality area from the rest of the world that I mean to use as a point to articulate what makes Dark Souls 1's level design so damn cool. It always perplexed me how Dark Souls 1 had figured this out so well, and future games only rarely made efforts to directly replicate or evolve on Dark Souls 1's level design where they could. Can you imagine if they made an Elden Ring-sized game where the whole map was an evolution of Dark Souls 1's style? The game would not be released, and we would still be posting Wooper memes on the Elden Ring subreddit, but it would be cool when it released. Do you see what I mean? It puts into perspective what makes the player's movement around the map so unique to this game and to gaming. Around the mid-early game, before you know it, you may go from Andre to Firelink Shrine by dropping through Darkroot and jogging up to the Valley of the Drakes, and making that decision is heavily contingent on the context of your current playthrough, which bosses you have to beat, which items you haven't collected, and which enemies you haven't killed yet, and that is precisely what makes it so great. The interconnectedness of the map design enables a dynamic intentionality in sequencing decisions between playthroughs. Outside of course, being enabled by the map design, the unsung hero here is the care put into these bonfire locations, and I would love to hear more people talk about this. So now that we understand why we must protect this bonfire at all costs, we will kill the dog, 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 and then get a key. But not before a little more pee. Let's turn around before I get carried away again. It's time for the depths. You'll forget this is a visit. Bruh. You'll forget this as a veteran player, but this area is brutal and scary. The level design here isn't my main focus though, it's the enemies. God forbid a new player gets their health cut in half. It may just be the end of Timmy's playthrough if the frogs get to him here. I've had the opportunity to introduce nearly a dozen people to Dark Souls 1, and I tell every single one of them the same thing. Talk to Oswald after the gargoyles and buy 2 purging stones. Because if you don't, you are in for one hell of an adventure to get your max HP back. Getting out is far higher friction than wandering in. For any longtime FromSoft head watching this video, before you scoff at the idea of the depths being considered a difficult area, think about the way you actually replay it. I'm willing to bet you play it the exact same way I do. You either skip it entirely or run through it as fast as possible. And I'm in 2 camps of thought on this one. On one hand, I consider running through this area to be considerably enjoyable. It goes relatively fast and almost feels like a platformer, which in retrospect I wish it didn't, because I feel like these next few areas are where FromSoft got the bright idea to make areas like these in future games. But on the other hand, when I sit with myself and meditate on why I spend so little time in the depths nowadays, and why it became second nature to love running through it as fast as possible, it's because I'm traumatized. Getting your health halved is traumatizing. The rats poisoning you as you take wrong turns is traumatizing, and falling down these holes when you are low on Estus is traumatizing. And if you are one of those people who swear that they are too cool and too good to have been traumatized by this comment section is not for you. This is a safe space for those who have almost lost their way in the depths. Sorry, that was a trauma response. Every single thing I just said about the depths is even better applied to Blighttown, but if you've played the game, you already know that. With the intention of this video being to try and discuss standout parts of Dark Souls 1 in ways you maybe haven't heard before, FromSoft games design choices, checkpoint and map elements, to how the community's understanding of the game and how a veteran might replay it have evolved, I would love to take a moment to appreciate Blighttown for one of Dark Souls 1's biggest strengths and one of the town's least discussed characteristics. The lore, the environmental storytelling of this area is deeply tragic. Blighttown's infamy for being an evil, funny swamp area in a Souls game precedes it so prominently that its tragedy has been buried. The signs of a once modest mining settlement on the cliffs of the underbelly of Lordran are readily apparent to those who take a moment to pause and ponder. A look at one of New Londo's sealers, Yulva, proves what this town used to be. A home. She wanted to return to her home and do what she could to heal and restore it to what it used to be, and it claimed her life. I'm willing to bet you understood the troubles of this town even if you aren't too much of a lorehead. There are those who looked after this town. The Izalith tragedy ravaged the town to near unrecognizability. An area with few notable cutscenes to its name, yet belonging to it is a deep, tragic story that likely surprised none of you to hear for the first time on account of it being masterfully conveyed through its design and characters. And that is beautiful. Just slowly looking around the town, you can pick up so many bits of what it might have looked like before everything happened. And it's too bad our chosen undead isn't an empath, eh? Dispose of Titty Spider, ring the bell, and watch our giant friend open the doors to the funhouse. You're not done though. You have to make your way back out. And getting out can feel as difficult or maybe even more difficult than the way in. This feeling of descent into Blighttown and the ascent out is truly a moment that this game can call its own. It's a carefully balanced act that you'll find yourself holding your breath as you dive deep into a forgotten bog, and what you find in your time there is more sad than it is scary, and shortly after your sense of accomplishment begins to wane, it hits you that you still have to make it out alive. So you begin to search for your light at the end of the tunnel. You find it, and you earn your breath of fresh air, and by now you get it. With this next area included, do you notice anything particular about the last 3 areas? All of them are trying to kill you. I think that's pretty funny. In fact, the concept of this whole area is really funny to me, in both lore and gameplay. This place is built from the ground up by the lords to keep us, humans, or hollows, or undead, out of Anor Londo. That's right, there is NIMBY commentary in Dark Souls. The lords need the humans to be farmed for their souls and humanity, cursed to an unending cycle of revival until they lose the very purpose that kept them going. But I don't want them in my backyard! Sense Fortress is another one of this game's weeder areas. Like a difficult class meant to tempt the faint-hearted to divert from an area of study. This is a place where many players are tempted to give up on the game. It is a beautiful microcosm of Dark Souls 1's ability to abstract and then reconstruct fundamental narrative and philosophical elements from the game's motifs, stories, and inspirations into felt experiences for the player. It is in this context that you can begin to take a step back to look at the whole game and understand what makes the experience of this game so uniquely compelling. The game's cohesion starts with well-designed levels and satisfying bosses on the surface, but as you move through this world, trip, struggle, fail, fall, try again, you might learn something more about the nature of perseverance and maybe even something about yourself in the process. It's satisfying and, dare I say, fulfilling. Themes of what it means to be human and parallels between hollowing and depression or giving up and losing purpose are both captured in the systems and story of the game. It's both you, the player, and presumably the character who are on this roller coaster that they can get off of at any time, but decide to persevere despite the world saying, indifferently, fuck you at every turn. The same way that Sen's Fortress's ruthless gatekeeping is felt viscerally by the players on their first journey, the fact that this game's often obtuse lore and narrative are translated to the player in the way that the game feels, whether they recognize it or not, is truly special. The sweet crescendo of the early game, and Orlando, often thought by new players and Souls first-timers to be the final area of the game. I don't think I have any hipster opinions on Anne Orlando as a whole. The scenery is earned, it's epic and majestic and such. It has an equally difficult boss to match the scale of the area, and moreover, the two largest rewards in the game, after the boss, hand you a large bowl. I will now do my best to make you drink the Kool-Aid from this said bowl, and I will preface it by saying that I like all the Souls games a lot. Are we good? Okay, buckle in. While there is some nuance to my take, I won't pull punches when I say that the video game, Dark Souls, is made the strongest of all the games in the trilogy by warping being a locked feature up until this point in the game. Now, if that feels like a crack smoker take to you, or if your first game in the series was Elden Ring or maybe Dark Souls 3, and your conception of Souls was formed with warping unlocked from minute zero, please hear me out. Much of what I've mentioned in this video has been level design and world cohesion. It appears obvious to me that those things, which I will refer to as world design, are somewhat of an Ouroboros. As a game designer attempts to make a 3D checkpoint-based world, there are many choices that they have to balance for the game's experience to feel good to a player, especially if a large gameplay element is setbacks and failure. And in specific, it's that I think Dark Souls 1 does this so much better than the other games that I am comfortable giving it this accolade. Let's imagine what would happen if there was only one bonfire in the game, Firelink. At that point, you have effectively constructed the 3D combat RPG analog to a Faudian game. If you're not familiar, those are games like Getting Over It or Pogo Stuck, where, as you progress through the game, you are constantly at risk of being reset to the beginning. Those games are relatively short and are able to be speedrun in a couple minutes. If they were super long, they would lose their luster to most people and would mostly be given up on before even getting close to finishing. And God forbid you unknowingly ride the snake towards the end. Faudian games are for a very specific kind of people, because their draw and scope are made more narrow. The games are fun for players who don't mind getting reset to the beginning of a specific challenge that they are trying to master or overcome, knowing that there will be a definitive end to it. They are difficult and obtuse for the sake of it, and we can agree that all the Souls games would kind of suck if there was only one single checkpoint at the beginning of the game and you were meant to blitz through it all in one go, or else you fail. The one exception I could think of is maybe Sekiro, and specifically its boss rush mode, or at least if Sekiro was made around its boss rush mode and that was the game as a whole. The idea of Sekiro is that you are mastering the combat and passing the tests that are the bosses. In a Faudian game, this would mean mastering the movement mechanics and displaying your knowledge on some really kind of obnoxious jump. And if Sekiro was released as just its boss rush mode and was built around it, I could at least see a cult following forming around it, and it being appreciated for its deep mechanics and enjoyability, as it would cater particularly well to the masochistic among FromSoft fans, which are not few in number. We now share an understanding of one extreme example of what would happen to a Souls game if the checkpoints were warped unrecognizably. On that other extreme, let's imagine what would happen if we tripled the bonfires in Dark Souls 1. The added safety and reduction in suspense, or losing souls in progress, would dissolve much of what the balanced challenge that we've come to love the game for means. The Undead Burg bonfire that we use to run back to Capra Demon, or go up to the parish, or use as a checkpoint back to Firelink, or just use as the actual level bonfire, would lose much of its intricacy if there were, let's say, a bonfire between the Undead Burg and Firelink. If there were a bonfire right before the depths, the shortcut after the Capra Demon that heads back to Firelink Shrine would also be considerably less useful and interesting. Now imagine those bonfires were there, and you could warp between them from the onset of the game. Not only does that take out an interesting element of traversal and resource management from the game, it would almost make you wonder if the game's level design is even that good. These new bonfire areas would be, on their own, more of dead ends than checkpoints. The active balancing act of matching Dark Souls 1's Freak, aka making its level design strong while integrating those levels into an appropriately cohesive world, those two things are deeply linked, and the nature of their relationship would change if, let's say, the fastest way around was warping. It would remove the point of these quirky shortcuts that we've come to adore the game for. Not only would this hypothetical remove much of the utility of this cool design, but the game might simply just flow better without these little connective bits. And from the get-go in 2 and 3, you can warp between all these bonfires. This is the reason that Dark Souls 1's world design is so distinct even within the series. And that isn't to disparage the direction that the other games took. Dark Souls 2 and 3 did what they did pretty well. Moreover, getting around the world of Dark Souls 1, even if I say it's more cohesive or better than the other games, takes longer, and some people just don't like that. That distinction also makes the other games significantly more accessible, which in particular is why I think Dark Souls 3 is such a fantastic game for people who are new to the series. But I will take my point a step further by reminding y'all that while the most accepted praise of Dark Souls 1 is probably the map and levels, the warping dynamic as compared to future games is often separated in conversation, if at all included. And that is strange because I would contend that the lack of warping from the onset of the game is the exact reason that Dark Souls 1's map is the way it is. Because they had designed this world with walkability first, not warpability. Why does this feel like a bikes versus cars discussion? Yeah, after bringing up NIMBY earlier, I'm not beating the socialist allegations, but whatever. If I don't have you on board with this discussion yet, or if you were with me up until I started making this sweeping comparison, let me hold your attention on this point just a little bit longer so that I may share one more idea. It's possible that you're mostly on board that Dark Souls 1 is made great by its world, but reject the assertion that the balance between warping and the levels are enough to pull Dark Souls 1 above other games. And maybe you're right, but if you're watching this and you think that, you might have another game in mind that you believe does all these things, but a little bit better. As I mentioned earlier, Bloodborne, many people's most beloved game, has the most similar map to Dark Souls 1. Why? How come? Certainly it could be a coincidence. If this video proves anything, it's only that there is a ton to appreciate about every single one of the Souls-like that FromSoft has made. But I'm happy to assert that this similarity is because Bloodborne's map design runs the closest to Dark Souls 1. While you may not be able to warp between lanterns in the same level, warping is available from the beginning of the game between the Hunter's Dream and Yharnam. This makes it a super interesting dynamic and a side evolution of what Dark Souls was trying to do. The difference in style is partially due to the hub being segregated from the rest of the map, and from the ground up, each chunk of the world that is separated by these different tiers of lanterns in the hub are designed to be able to be navigated by walking rather than warping. Now, if you like either of these games, obviously I'm not implying that the only thing you like about them, or the only thing worth liking about them, is the map or level design. Hell, I have a few friends in mind that probably would not have given any of this any thought before watching and would still rank Bloodborne as their favorite, citing almost literally any other great thing from the game than this, which is super valid. But I think only good things have happened to the games that have cared about that the most. I would love to see more people vocalize their love for this type of thing. That game is balanced upon many strong themes and mechanics, but nobody would feel the same about it if the world was delivered in a significantly weaker way. Now the endgame has begun, but you can't warp to every bonfire. It's here that you'll need to use your aggregated experience from up until now. You'll feel that the mere navigation of the world has a skill curve and skill expression. All of that time spent intimately learning the world by playing, discovering what would happen if you hit an illusory wall here to unlock a fire, learning the fastest way to descend into the Darkroot Basin. In these moments, as you recognize that the placement of the Lord Vessel has unlocked your ability to further traverse these areas, that maybe you'd only given a couple cursory visits prior, there is an undeniable charm about the freedom of choice and expression you're given when it comes time to move around the map or take a personal quest off of your list. Perhaps in replaying the game, you remember that before you visit Nido, you would like to join the Covenant and have a little bit of fun in multiplayer. or just unlock an achievement. If you've already ventured into the catacombs, you're given a choice to revisit this here skelly hole by trekking down from Firelink, or in the remaster, visiting everyone's favorite skeleton dwarf, Blacksmith. As a quick aside, I love their attention to detail here when they recorded this guy's voice lines on what I can only assume to be a $20 webcam's microphone.
Be gone with you. You'll spoil my focus.
No doubt you've noticed the repeated emphasis on these fringe scenarios that highlight moments where the game enables niche, playthrough-specific decisions. Real people worked together to bring forward a vision of this world that contains plenty of narrative and gameplay meaning, but also an unexpected degree of personalization. And the very idea that a player could miss a detail, wasting precious dev hours, is taboo. When something is included in a game that most players will not be able to appreciate for its difficulty to access, that to me is proof that the world has been brought to life.
Help me.
And I don't just say that about areas like Ash Lake. I mean the very experience that from the ground up you could be trekking through the world in a different way than someone that you know. That is no accident. Let's say, hypothetically, the second half of Dark Souls 1 was weaker than the first half. Well, too bad it's not a hypothetical. You know, even if the experience of traversing the map at this stage meaningfully evolves, I think we can all agree that the endgame content is a different discussion. It's an often levied criticism of the game that the areas become haphazardly thrown together and the boss quality drops significantly after you leave the bull with the throat goat. And I really like the second half of the game, or at least I'm very good at gaslighting myself into thinking that the DLC is the actual second half of the game. And since the content is passable enough to anyone on a first playthrough, allow me to instead share how I enjoy the end game as a veteran, and from the perspective of someone who likes to find the replay value in these games and deeply enjoys that element of them. This leg of the game's glaring weaknesses are the Tomb of Giants, Lost Izalith and kind of the Demon Ruins, and to varying degrees, these guys. For the most part, I approach all of these areas in the same way that I approach the depths, and that is running through them really fast. As I get better at each of these areas and faster with each of these runs, the idea of revisiting a less than stellar part of the game really doesn't bother me that much. There are a lot of really solid elements to a lot of these areas, and one of the best things about running through them really fast and creating my own fun by optimizing them as much as possible is that I not only get to avoid much of what makes the areas not great, but I also get to forget about a lot of the stuff that makes them really good. Which means by the time I want to come around and play through them normally, I get to rediscover hidden treasures or re-experience some heartfelt storylines. It's a nice cycle of appreciating the strengths that the game has and then creating my own fun. But don't be too fooled, right? These areas are weaker, yes, but on the whole they're not bad. And it's okay to get a little creative to find your fun where you may otherwise lose your patience and have that be tested a little bit. But this strategy does not work quite as well with the bosses. So would you believe me if I said that the boss I look forward to fighting most of all of these is the Bed of Chaos? Dark Souls 1 is old. You probably know this, but Demon Souls could barely make it out of the womb, and I'm pretty sure the execs at Bandai were trying to use the good old coat hanger on Dark Souls 1. But that means this game is unbalanced as a motherfucker. Now, I'm not under the guise that this is intentional by any means, but this kind of makes for a fun, choose-your-own difficulty, where if you want to have an easier time with the game, you use a Black Knight or Twinkling Titanite weapon. If you want to have an okay time, you do your lore build or whatever, and if you want a challenge run, there's plenty of ways to do that. But because it's broken to all hell, that means it is jank, and these bosses are cheesable, baby. It's like when you go through an old Zelda game, and let's say you unlock the bomb in a dungeon or something, and then at the very end on the boss, instead of having a real combat, you just throw the bomb at the boss a couple times at the right time, and the game says, okay, good, you did good job. This is, and I'm not joking, literally how I play these bosses. I fight them all the exact same way each time. Four Kings, I walk up with Havel and a big weapon. Nito, let him kill his skeletons and beat the shit out of him with the club I got from Anne Orlando. Seath? I don't think too hard about this one, if I'm being totally honest. I mean, like, Bleed's good, I think, but I usually just get frustrated because I'm trying to cut the tail off even though I'm not running an intelligence character. And the Bed of Chaos. You get a bow, you get some firebombs, or you memorize the route and save quit like crazy, and the boss is super easy. I love fighting them and beating them as fast as possible because they're not why I'm here. I'm just, they're required, so I kill them, but if I wanted a good, cool boss fight, I would go get sucked in by the monkey hand, right? Like, I'm just here to dump in these guys' mouths on some victory lap shit. And learning to cheese these guys is a unique process in and of itself. You learn your own unique skill set, and it leads to mastery of these specific mechanics that you often don't use otherwise, like what, bow aiming and fire bombs? I've got a mean free-aimed firebomb. Catch me in the arena in Elden Ring, you won't. Even with all of these quality hiccups in this part of the game, there's a reason that it is still in the conversation. There's something to be said about bigger not necessarily meaning better, and with the game being much smaller than something like Elden Ring, you get a tight package. Does that sound weird? Should I say that? Whatever, the game is dense, and because of that, a bunch of the high points are all closely strung together. And I would love to talk about the DLC, but I really don't have anything interesting to say on it. It is beautiful, it is perfect to me. FromSoft DLCs are already some of the best things in gaming, period, and you're watching a white boy do a video essay on Dark Souls. You don't also need to hear me tell you why Artorias of the Abyss or Ring City or the fucking Bloodborne one is good, right? And just like that, the game is about to come to an end. All it takes is you walking down into the kiln of the first flame, where the curtain is pulled back and you see that this whole Age of Fire thing is not what you thought it was. Gwyn burned those closest to him unrecognizably, further plunging the world of humans into chaos and scorching the world irreparably, starting something that we know continues for many, many thousands of years. I won't hear it from anybody that Gwyn is an underwhelming fight, because this game and this story doesn't need an intense Consort Radon Mikola type boss fight. He is the Lord of Cinder now, not Sunlight. He is clearly crestfallen, and that's why you can parry him to death. Boom, boom, yeah. This is actually where the video was supposed to end, but just like in the game, you don't actually have a choice. It just kind of keeps going. You're gonna keep watching, because after you beat Gwyn, you're forced into the next new game cycle. I incomparably prefer the fact that you get to wait to go into future new game cycles in other Souls games, but if there was ever a game for them to do this with, it would be Dark Souls 1. Just as it ends, it begins again. The difference this time is that you have all of the gear that you just used to beat the game the first time, which means everything I've talked about with approaching the game however you want is not only technically possible, but now you might as well. I got a pop quiz for you. After the first boss of the game, the Asylum Demon, how many second possible bosses are there with the Master Key? I'll give you a second. Pause. Okay, we back? Bell Gargoyles, Capra Demon, Quelaag, Puppy Dog Sif, Moonlight Butterfly, Pinwheel, Stray Demon, Taurus Demon, and I guess Iron Golem, if you want to parry in front of this here pillar. This amount of freedom and the world being built to support this kind of decision making speaks for itself, or maybe I've speaked it to death already, so let's talk a little bit about the Master Key. Oh, if this is not the best part of this whole game, I don't know what is. I really don't know what they were thinking when they made the Master Key. Like, literally, I have no idea what the idea behind it was, but I'm assuming it was a love letter to veteran players or people who wanted to replay the game or sequence break. And I implore you, if you've only ever played this game normally, start with the Master Key and just run around and do shit. It accentuates many of what I consider to be the best parts of this game. And if you have a little bit of tolerance for some challenge run difficulty stuff, then it unlocks a bunch of different paths for you to get creative. One of the things I adore about getting the opportunity to make this video is the perspective it gave me. Back when Elden Ring was on the horizon, a lot of people that I talked to said that they would never be able to go back to Dark Souls because Elden Ring would be big Dark Souls and it would do everything that Dark Souls did. But when I took the time to look back into it, I realized that for everything that might make this game look a little clunky or outdated, there's something that makes it so special that no other game that exists has really been able to replicate. I love these games, and maybe, just maybe, I could do another one sharing my thoughts on what I love about Dark Souls 2, because I adore that game. So, if you want to see that, let me know. Thanks for watching.